I'd like to welcome Dr. Hasse.
Thank you, Lisa, for that very generous introduction, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really honored to be your luncheon speaker today in one of my favorite cities in the whole world, New Orleans. What a city. The Jazz Masters, this is my thesis this afternoon, can teach us a lot about leadership. If you think about it, government agencies and jazz bands have a number of commonalities. They're both complex adaptive systems. In both, the leaders have to balance autonomy of the individual with the group. You have virtuosos who may step to the front of the stage from time to time and take a solo, and one of the challenges of the leader is getting all of the parts to play together. And that brings us to the leadership lessons from the Jazz Masters. For the Jazz Masters were masters of leadership, creativity, innovation, and change. The Jazz Masters found new ways to lead, fresh ways to innovate, and inventive ways to address old challenges. Sometimes you'll see a small jazz combo up there on the stage, and there are no visual cues, there are no verbal cues, but they're able to shift tempos, even begin and end a piece together. It looks like they're communicating by telepathy. But what's really going on is they're listening very, very closely to one another. Whether you're listening upwards in the organization, downwards in the organization, or sideways in the organization, the Jazz Masters teach us that you listen closely so you can move as one. Wynton Marsalis personifies the principle of dance with the unexpected. Dance with the unexpected. A few years ago, Wynton and his small group were playing at a New York nightclub, the Blue Note, and there in the front row in the audience, right in the middle of an intense piece, this guy's cell phone goes off really loudly. You know, some performers would have stopped the performance right there and given that person, you know what. For doing that, what did Wynton do? He didn't even miss a beat. He didn't even blink an eye, pause a split second. He immediately took the ringtone of that cell phone and incorporated it into his solo on the trumpet. Dance with the unexpected. Now let's compare and contrast briefly the retention styles, the leadership and retention styles of two of the great jazz band leaders, the big band leaders, Benny Goodman and Duke Ellington. Benny Goodman was a strict taskmaster. Woe be to anybody who, in his organization, his band, who misbehaved or let him down. That person would become the recipient of his glare, widely known as the ray. You did not want to get the ray. It was absolutely withering. Singer Helen Forrest said she left the Goodman band, quote, in order to avoid a nervous breakdown. You didn't want the ray. Duke Ellington was a band leader of a very different sort. He treated everybody in his band, in his organization, if she or he were a flower, needing sunlight, watering, nurturing, and encouragement. And as a result, he had a very different feel to working for his organization. Let's compare and contrast the two. Goodman was a disciplinarian. Ellington was a tolerant leader. Goodman demanded high musicianship. Ellington inspired it. Goodman ruled by a kind of fear. You did not want to get the ray. Ellington ruled by inspiration. He truly inspired his men and women. Goodman monopolized most of the solos in his band's performances. Ellington gave them away to his players. Goodman's band suffered legendary turnover. The average tenure was 1 or 2 years. Ellington's band enjoyed legendary longevity. People were with him for decades. They didn't want to leave his band. Goodman kept his band together for only 15 years. Ellington managed to keep his organization together for 50 years, more than 3 times as long. So I'd like to ask you, which kind of leader would you rather work for? And which kind of leader would you rather be? I have to tell you a little story about Artie Shaw. A few years ago, we wanted to get him to donate his famous Begin clarinet to the Smithsonian. He was quite old and too frail to travel to Washington, so we traveled to Southern California where he lived to have a press conference with him. And he was 93 at the time and in terrible shape. He was in a wheelchair. He had macular degeneration. Could barely hear. And this was a man who had been so vital, a matinee idol, married to Ava Gardner and Lana Turner and all these glamorous movie stars. And it was disheartening to see him at this stage of his life. But he was all there mentally, all there. At the press event, he said, "People ask me, what's the difference between you and Benny Goodman?" He says, "I'm alive." Then he says, an elderly man goes to the doctor's office and says, "Doc, I'm having trouble hearing." And the doctor says, well, how old are you, sir? And the guy yells back, "I'm 93. And the doctor says, "You're 93? You've heard enough." And as a final example this afternoon, and to both demonstrate the importance of practicing and to summarize several earlier points, take risk, improvise, and find your own sound, I'd like to play you one last piece at the piano. This is a piece written by Leroy Carr. It's one of the early boogie-woogies. He called it How Long Blues. After the first two statements of the melody, I'll launch into my own solo on How Long Blues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hasse. That was wonderful.
Thanks, everybody. You've been a great audience.